Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Today, I'm going to be speaking about mental skills with Aaron Walsh. Aaron, welcome.
G'day mate, great to be with you. I hope you're well.
This has been a long time coming.
Yeah, it has. It has followed each other's work, I think, for quite a while. So it's lovely to actually connect with you in person.
Indeed. I'm really looking forward to unpacking all things mental skills, a passion for me as much as it is for you. We'll start where we always do. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, just grew up in a pretty much working class family in Hawke's Bay, which is been in the news at the moment because of the flooding and big cyclone came through last week. So that's been difficult for a real horticultural, agricultural region. So fruit bowl in New Zealand sort of stuff, like Mediterranean climate, brilliant place to grow up. Really good area for rugby because it's pretty dry. So lots of running rugby. So I won't go through all the list, but there's just All Blacks galore come out of there. And then sort of just spent like the middle part of my life in the US. So it was a major part of my life. Met my wife in the US and got to work in some pretty cool sports over there. And have been back in New Zealand for a while now. I've got 2 kids. One started university this week, which is our big shift for us as a family, which is going to be awesome. And then just got another teenage son. So Christy and I sort of feel like we're at this, not at the back end, but we've sort of got through that period of life where we're actually looking at each other and thought, we might actually get to know each other again, which is going to be wonderful.
After such a long time.
Yeah, so that's pretty much me.
I'm intrigued by the American journey that you've had. If you don't mind me asking, what took you over there? You met your wife over there, and what got you into mental skills, sports psychology when you were over there?
That's great. What a great question. What got me over there was boredom, probably. All of my mates had kind of done the UK for the OE, and I just thought, I want to do something. I've always wanted to do something a little bit different, and I had this. I remember ever since I was young. It's actually a really kind of interesting story. I played a lot of, softball growing up, which is similar to baseball, but different.
Yeah.
And when I was younger, I used to play quite well. And this little newspaper article back when I think I was about 12 or 13, it says America beckons young softballer, and it was about a dream that I had to go live in America and work in baseball, which became so ironic because that's what ended up happening. So that was sort of a goal. Got over there and sort of found my way, luckily, through the whole work situation, and then met my wife. And I suppose what got me into it was helping out player development within an agency more than anything else. Okay. So it wasn't, big agencies have departments and I sort of was player personnel / development. And I was at a spring training in Phoenix, must have been like 03, 04. And I remember sitting next to the manager of the team and looking out, and you see like 200-300 of these young, like amazing athletes. They all look the same. And I remember saying to the guy, I said, listen, like what separates these guys? Like they all look physically the same. They all look technically the same. And he said, it's the top 2 inches. And I said, what do you do about that? He goes, nothing. And that was sort of this moment when I went, you've got this thing that, because my sort of philosophy around the mental side is, and one of my pet peeves is when people say it's 90% mental. I'm like, not even close. You can't outthink a bad body. You can't outthink a lack of skills. But what you can do is maximize what you have if you're prepared to work on this part of the game. So, I think they had this big point of difference that they were looking at and going, we think it's going to be really important, but we don't know what. That was sort of, and I don't think it's much different today, which is really ironic. And, some of the research I've done has been around that. Like everybody says this stuff's important. No one's integrating it. Why? And that was sort of back there was the genesis of those thoughts for me so to sort of frame it for you, I got introduced to the idea of really developing some support in that area because logically I couldn't work out why everybody said it was so important. Nobody was doing anything about it. And I thought there must be some reasons why. And, those reasons have probably unfolded over the last 2 decades. But in some sense, I don't know how you feel about it, mate. It's almost a little bit sad because in some ways, even though the the work and the role of the work is valued. I don't know if we've grown that much on how we've integrated. I think in some places, they've done amazing jobs, and in pockets it seems to be really, really awesome. But across the whole, when I talk to people who do our work, I still feel this undercurrent of frustration about their inability to see the work mature in the way that they hoped.
To speak to a little bit about what you said there, it reminds me of what Dr. Scott Goldman, who's now with the Golden State Warriors, said to me. He said that he once went along to a big NFL team. The GM wanted to speak to him, and the GM said, I know I want you, but I don't know why, and I don't know how we're going to use you. But I do know that I want
you. Yeah.
And I think what you're speaking to is that's what tends to be the state of play right now. We have mindsets, maybe because of the proliferation of knowledge from the internet. People are more knowledgeable about our area now, and thus people are more open to being, whether it's person first or putting mindset more at the forefront of things, but they don't necessarily know how to do it. And so they're scared, they're fearful. And so, subsequently, they don't know necessarily how to introduce it and subsequently build a program that revolves around the mental side of the game. That's kind of what I'm hearing you say, and my experience aren't too dissimilar, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it, I think it's a two-way street. Like, that's what I'm probably...
Yeah.
Like, I think, you have this idealism that also comes from our end that needs to be just sort of quashed in the way that, this is what I need for the work to be effective. And I'm all about understanding the system and understanding what is required in the system and understanding how I can be integrated into the system. But I think sometimes there's a danger that we overpromise and underdeliver on the work, and we actually try to make it more than what it is. And that's why I mentioned this thing about the 90% mental stuff, is that, we should never position our work as the difference to making a team go from here to here. It might have some impact, but, we're not, as I said before, if our athletes aren't physically ready, if they're not skillful enough, we're not going to do that much. But what we can do is, when we have teams that we know that have a high level of capability and they're failing to reach that capability, is that we can get into that gap and understand, why aren't you delivering on what you need to deliver? But I've just seen from the other side, people in our industry go in and they want everything. They want the whole palace on day one. And as you know, working in sports, that's not how it works. It doesn't even work. There is a proving ground. And, I think some of the questions like what you just said about, the Golden State, I reckon now 90% of the time I write my job description because I'm trying to help the organization understand where value could be added in a practical way on the ground. And I think what you're saying is dead right. I just call it the difference between perceived and actualized value. So there's a perception we value the work, but in reality we don't, because the two things that you can measure to value the work is resource and time. And resource is not really a great measure because you can throw a little bit of money at anyone. It's actually how much time, because you think about in a high performance team, what's the most valuable commodity?
Yeah.
It's time. So if you want to know how valuable your work is, how much time have you been given to shape that part of performance?
You mentioned over-promising, under-delivering, that we could potentially be guilty of going down that path.
Yeah.
Is that our fault? Or is that some kind of social, historical context of the perception of the mental side of things that, historically we think about motivational gurus standing on stage, punching the air, you can achieve anything, see it to believe it to achieve it, and the perhaps overzealous promises around visualization and things like that we are slaves to the messaging delivered by motivational gurus over the years.
I think there's a bit of, I think it's a bit of both. I think there's a bit of naivety around the idea of actually how performance happens sometimes in our world. And I don't say that
I'd agree
critically whatsoever. I think there's I think you can have the understanding of where psychology fits within the performance of someone. We can understand that there's so much written, there's so much research, but you've got to be able to marry that. And how does that now get delivered and accepted within the context of a team? And so when I'm talking about the over-promising, the naivety is like you often see a team that you think is capable of way more than it's currently delivering. And you can see what you're doing as part of that, answering that equation. But then the second thing, which I think is even more important to recognize, is what happens within our own humanness as we're trying to deliver the work. I don't know how you feel, mate, but there's never been one day I walked into a team and go, part of my role here is to prove my value. And there's some ego behind those statements at times for all of us. And then I feel like we overstretch, lack patience, try to perhaps bring too much value too quick without allowing the work to settle in. So that's something I've been acutely aware of. When I've got in trouble and not delivered the work in the way that's been relevant to the needs of the team, has been where I get insecure about my work. I don't know if it's actually valued or having any impact. And then I overstrain or overstride and end up, just getting a bit messy inwardly, and then the work gets a bit messy because you're not actually serving the needs of your team all the time. You're serving your own needs to feel like you've got a place that's valued. I don't know if that's too open, but I've certainly felt that over the years, because it is a piece of work that at times is a bit misunderstood, and your need to I suppose justify its presence is not always helpful.
If we're people who talk about the implications of somebody's environment, though,
yeah,
I'd put to you that that anxiety that you're experiencing isn't your fault, and is as a consequence of the powers that be, the governing bodies, the organisations that we're speaking about and potentially want to work with don't necessarily know what to do with us. So from day one, there is a feeling of we have to prove ourselves. There is a feeling of time is limited. There is a feeling of having to sprinkle magic dust.
Yeah.
I'm not pushing back. I'm just sharing vulnerability, I suppose.
Well, I think the thing is, Dan, to be honest now, I think as I've got more experienced, I'm way, way more picky than I would have been, because
join the club.
I've just seen how the system that is created has so much impact on. And I think that's a lot of my work in the last couple of years has actually been more with coaches and organizations, not about how they coach or set up things, but how do they use people like us? And what needs to be in place? Like, how do you make sure that they're not a silo? How do you understand what sort of model that you want to have within your work? What sort of framework are you going to deliver the work through? How are we going to deliver the work? Who's going to drive the work? All of those sort of questions now probably become, like really, really important to be answered, because those ecological questions allow some sort of ability to ascertain whether the work is going to have the impact. And I don't think any of us want to be another body in the room in an already filled room of people who are probably all wondering what they bring to the table and sit awkwardly at the back with a notebook in hand. Like, that's a nightmare to me. I couldn't think of anything worse or less effective.
I'm a general manager, I'm a CEO, I'm a head coach, I'm a manager, I'm sitting in front of you, I want to bring you in. What we're here today really to talk about mental skills, and we've kind of started that conversation. But what are mental skills to you?
Yeah, to me, I think probably the definition for me that makes it probably a bit unconventional, I suppose, mate, is that we recognize everybody has a gap between what they're capable of and what they deliver when it matters.
Okay.
So we know that gap is mostly not a physical or skill gap, because we've seen their capability, whether they're in training or whether they're in a gym or whatever that is. We've seen what they're capable of, and they're not able to access that skill set when it matters because of the presence of pressure or the presence of anxiety, whatever it might be. So I sort of, my sort of lead in is my role is to explore that gap and to reduce the gap individually and collectively. And then all the calls come after that, like I think when we say what are mental skills, I think people automatically go to the tools.
Yeah.
Whereas I think it's better to go to the philosophy, like why are we doing this work?
Okay.
Like, if we step back and then we can go on the what and the how. So, here's how we would go about that work. And as you know, that's a bespoke thing depending on the needs of the athlete and the needs of the team, like the history of the team is Like you'd speak to a team. I remember with the Chiefs, we lost 11 games in a row. Like your work in that space is really, really different from a team that's absolutely flying. So like understanding context, understanding the journey, all those sort of things. But I suppose for a GM too, like I reckon it's really important. Like I've sort of got a process, I suppose, around that. So the first thing I would say, well, what model do you want? And I can come back and talk a little bit about that. So you got multiple models, like you can have, I go all the way from you got no mental skills, you got minimalist, which is you get someone in pre-season and maybe someone in the year. You got a deficit model, which is you got someone in the room to fix problems. You got a skill model where we place it alongside the other disciplines and we say like this is important, and we approach it maybe through like needs analysis, all those sort of principles. And then you've got an integrated model, which is what we would probably call a pie, like we're after a psychologically informed environment. So how we select, So then that model, then I would also framework, what's the framework we need to deliver the work through? So well, I'm a big fan of strength-based sort of positive psychology. So So my framework and philosophy would be around mental skills exist not to just work with underperforming players, but to be a catalyst for players to improve performance. So we're looking at a performance enhancer, an increase of capability, just not a removal of interference. And then I'd talk to them about the content. So I think the content's a real simple one. I think the game tells you what you need to train with the people you're working with. I don't think a textbook tells you that. I think, well, what are the demands of what does a mentally proficient footballer do well, or what is it? And often those contextual, or the content is contextual to positional demands. So I think like every position, like in rugby, a prop has a different demand to then a 10. Then I would talk about how we're going to deliver this. So what's the delivery mechanism? So we're going to do it in small groups. We're going to do it once a week in a team meeting. Do you want the work to be so? And then finally, I reckon, if I'm consulting with a club, I'll say the last thing you need to answer after you've done all that is the person. And what you've done in the past is found the person first, ask them to answer all of those questions, have them build a good program, and then they're gone. So, the strategy, the mental performance strategy is not owned by the club. It's owned by an individual. It has no longevity. So why I'm saying all that is I think like that's quite detailed, but this is the way that I've found for me is that if I don't have a clear picture of what success looks like, if I don't have a clear picture of what ecosystem I'm functioning in, then I don't have any ability to really impact the environment or do the work in a way that could be effective.
So would that mean that, given that you're somebody now who wants to make as big an impact as you possibly can, you've said yourself that you're quite choosy, quite fussy in the roles that you take on, would you do anything less than within your model an integrated approach?
I'll do a skill model. I'm happy with doing a skill model. I won't do anything. I won't do deficit. Okay. I've already had that discussion actually with a potential team this week. We just need someone in there to help our players who are struggling. I'm like, I don't do that. Well, I do that, but that's not what I'm here for. Meaning there will be players that are struggling every week in our integrated model that want to have a chat, but that's not why I'm in the room. Like that's part of my remit.
Yeah.
If someone's out of form and they want to talk about it, that's what I'm here for. But I don't want my whole work based upon a coach sending in to me every Tuesday or Monday the 4 players who didn't play well and saying, fix them. It's ridiculous. I don't even know how we get to that place.
General manager wants you, CEO wants you, head coach is unsure. Can you work in that environment?
No, I can't work without alignment with the head coach. Yeah.
General manager wants you, CEO wants you, head coach wants you. You've got skeptical players. Do you win them over, or do you not take that position on in the first place?
No, I want to win them over. I love that challenge. Yeah, I had one like last year where I had a player going, "Oh, we've had a few of you in. We'll see how long you last." And in a week, he was sitting down having a coffee. So that's a cool challenge. Yeah, because what I reckon is like the older players. Like people always worry about the older players in our work. I love the older players. I'm like, hey, you got 2 years left on the career. You've barely done any work in this area. What if we make the last 2 years the best of your career? You know what? I think most of them are up for that. But if I say to them, "Oh, do you want to sit down and have a coffee and talk about what's," not a chance. Like, what's going on in your life, and how do you feel? Like, nah. But if I can, so I'll often challenge them on the performance front. Like, I don't reckon you're going to end your career well, or I don't reckon you've got the best out of yourself, and I reckon you've got more in the tank. And why don't we have a go at this area? And this can only benefit. What are you going to lose?
You've experienced in your career more older players who are skeptical, or more younger players who are skeptical?
Oh, definitely now older, because the young guys have been brought up in a generational, not a rugby thing, a generational thing where vulnerability is accepted.
Okay.
So, like you think about the young guys, like they share their whole life on Instagram or Snapchat or whatever they do. So the idea of talking about what's happening internally is something they're very comfortable with. Whereas I think 15 years ago, that was a bit of a shift. I see cocky young players who don't think they need it, but that's not skeptical young players.
It's interesting, isn't it? You say cocky young players. My experience has been there have been some young players that I've encountered within my consultancy practice who have had so much success up until that point that they either don't necessarily think, that I don't think I need this, but that's based on the evidence from the success that they've had, or they are just either brutally or blissfully unaware of some of their internal goings on as a consequence of the outer success that they've experienced. To intervene or not to intervene?
Yeah, I mean, the question to me around that stuff is really, really interesting, because you think, I think it's a real good sign of where they're at. Like, I think when I was playing, like, I understood I wasn't that good. And so any resource that could be helpful, I would have wanted to utilize. And so, like, to me, if I'm a club and I have a 2-star young players and 1-star young player saying, "Listen, I'm good, thanks. I'm cranking along. We've got this other young guy going, I'm good, thanks, but also could this make me better?" Like, it's a real good insight into what motivates them, 2, how they think they develop, and 3, whether there's enough humility to go, well, maybe I'm going to need more than what I've currently got. But as you know, like, adversity, you don't seek it, it finds you in sport. And there is going to be moments where, like if you got in rugby, for example, a young 21-year-old prop who's never gone backwards, makes a Super Rugby debut and gets bent like a staple, he's going to probably come find you Monday. And it's not because, and it sounds like deficit model, and it might start that way, but I like that as an open door to be able to go, listen, this is how you've approached it. Do you only lift weights when you play bad? Do you only do your skill work when you play bad? Why are you only talking to me when you play bad? So it's shifting the way that they perceive the work.
The deficit model integrated into the integrated model.
Yeah, pretty much. Normally through the skill.
I like the cohesion across your models. So, hey, you talked about having coffee with players. Does every player have to have a coffee with you? Do you have to see all players, mate? Do players have to work with you?
No, absolutely not. Like I've got a few players now in the different teams, and they might be senior All Blacks, or they might be, senior internationals. And about once a week, I'll swing by them and says, "You've probably cranking along nicely here, mate. You've got things where you need to. However, I don't want you to interpret that I haven't got time or I'm then neglecting you. I'm always open." Okay. But also, I suppose, backing up a little bit, Dan, when I first stand in front of a team, I let them know very, very clearly that I'm not chasing you. I'm not going to try and find you. I have a principle, which is feed the hungry. And if you want to grow, I'll give you everything I've got, but I'm not going to send you Texas to meet with me. I'm not going to say you have to come. I've got no interest in doing that. If you don't want to take ownership over this, then I can't help you. But if you do want to take ownership, I'll give you everything I got. So I'm pretty black and white about it. And I've watched some providers, mate, and really good, awesome people almost be too desperate to connect with players, and that desperation comes across as neediness, and the players go, "Well, I don't actually need to meet with you. I'm actually going fine at the moment, and I've got some good systems in place, and da 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 da. And I think we just have to be careful not to come across as like, we have to meet with everyone. And could you please have a coffee with me? Even just like, that's just, no, I reckon it's the opposite. I need to grow. I want to grow. If you want to grow, I'll help you. If you don't want to grow, it's your choice.
I agree. Does that sometimes impinge on your own mindset if you think about the tension between prevention and cure?
Not necessarily, because I also understand that, if we're looking at this, I love models, so you'll sort of understand where I'm coming from here, is that like when I think about going into a team, there's three things there's ultimately one thing that I want to occur. I want to have influence and impact on the player or the collective group. That's what I'm here for, right? To help them. But preceding that is, number one, I have to connect with them in order for them to have trust with them. Once I have trust, I can have impact. So I can't have impact without trust and connection. And so to me, there's always an element, and you say, do you have to have coffee? No, but yes, I want to know everyone. I don't necessarily need to work with everyone, but I do want to connect with everyone. And I do want to understand where they're coming from. And I think you would know this, is that connection really is the primary weapon we have to turn skeptics into people that will engage. If they actually like you and they enjoy you and you get to know them on the human level, chances are they're going to come and say g'day at some point and go, hey. But what I'm trying to more address in professional sports is this lack of ownership that we've created in the athletes by doing everything for them. And that my role is to send you a text 3 times a week to make sure you're at a meeting. I just got no. That's probably more the impulse behind it, rather than the sense of I don't want to connect with you and you're on your own. It's more the idea of like, why do we drive their development? Why do we drive or own their careers? This is theirs. And the best in the world that I've worked with, they own and we support. And I just think in modern sport, I watch so many coaches, I feel sorry for them having to drive the development or drive the learning or drive the growth of an athlete, because that feels like what they're meant to do, rather than being, and I don't know if I've mentioned this to you, I sort of see myself as a Sherpa in the work that I do. So, like you think about a Sherpa has 3 things he's got to do really well. He's got to provide knowledge. So, hey, don't go up the Kumu Icefall today. It's too hot and you may have ice. Okay. The second thing they got to do is provide tools, which is, hey, we're going to camp 1 to camp 2. Have you got crampons and an ice pick? We want to make sure you got the tools. And the analogy I use, every player has got an Everest. That's what they're trying to do. And every player wants to get to the top. So we got to have the right knowledge, right tools. And the fine thing, which I find is probably the most important, is support. So, they might get to camp 2 and they look at the summit and go, oh, how the hell am I ever going to get up that? That just seems undoable. And sometimes they just need someone to put an arm around and go, hey, don't worry about the summit. Let's worry about getting to camp 3 today. And so, I see my role as much more of coming alongside someone who's got an aspiration they're trying to achieve, and then making sure that my role in the mental space is to ensure, have they got the right knowledge, have they got the right tools, and have they got the right support? And if I can do that, then I feel like at least then we've, given them the opportunity to grow. But as you know, I'm not climbing Everest for them.
Knowledge, tools, support. Does that sum up a sound approach from a coach and not just a mental skills coach?
Yeah, 100%. And like that is my coaching model, the Sherpa. Like people ask me, what's your reference point? I just call, I'm a coaching Sherpa. I'm a Sherpa. And even the philosophy is supporting rather than driving. That's my philosophy around this work.
Your philosophy is supporting rather than driving. And you mentioned a couple of minutes ago, I don't want to misquote you, but feeling sorry for coaches who feel they have to drive their players all the time, stepping away from mental skills, although we'll come back there. I'm interested to investigate that because there's lots of coaches listening in. How do coaches who feel that they are entrenched in this got to drive model shift towards more of whether it's an autonomy supporting model or kind of Sherpa coaching model that you're speaking about? How do they free themselves from this burden of driving players?
I see the connection part is important for that. So when I sit down with a player, I just ask them 5 questions. If I'm first sitting down with them, like this is going a little bit beyond the family stuff. Like that will always be, especially in New Zealand, it's very important we connect with them about who they are and their family. But when we're talking about getting to know them as an athlete, I will ask them, why do you play the game? So why do you play rugby? So I want to understand their motivational pathways. I want to understand what makes them tick. The second question I ask them is, what are you trying to accomplish? So we're talking about their aspirations, which becomes, the anchor for the work that we do. As like if someone's saying, I'd like to play 15 Super Rugby games, that would be an awesome career. Or someone's saying, I want to be the best in 10 in the world. Even though the principle's the same, that work now has a different reference point. So we go, okay. So then the third thing would be, how do you think you would do that? I want to know about their self-awareness of their own game, whether they understand, going back to that thing before around athlete self-knowledge is, I can ask an athlete, you're really good. Can you tell me why? And mate, you'd be shocked at how many can't tell me why. So if you can't tell me why you're good, how can we be certain we'll get consistency from you, because you have no understanding of your framework of proficiency? So the how to me is really important. The when, so when do you do your work? I want to understand, do they have good energy and time management? Like, do they actually understand how to translate priorities into actions? And then finally is who. So real basic framework, but who is got 2 aspects, which is, who do you want to be? Like, what are going to be the values that are really important to you as you climb your Everest? Like, are there certain things that are just non-negotiables and who you are and you want to remain? So for example, we might have, some athletes that have a faith background, and we want to really understand that that's important. That's non-compromising for them. We have to work with that. And then the second part of the who question is, who's your circle? Like, who's your support people? So I think that's important to know, because a lot of these guys, like, I think I've talked to one guy the other day who had 9 coaches last year in the 3 teams. So who are you listening to? Like, that's a big question, isn't it? When you've got 9 different voices. And so that's sort of why I'm saying that, Dan. That allows me to get a really lovely snapshot of what I'm working with. Like, I'm understanding their motivation. I'm understanding their aspirations. I'm understanding their self-awareness. I'm understanding their management of time and energy, and I'm understanding their identity and their support systems. So once I have that, I think then I'm able to transfer ownership more effectively. Does that make sense? Like, I'm able then to tap into some of those things that I would have discovered about them. And like, so if they say, I want to be an All Black, for example, or in the case now, I want to play 50 tests for Scotland. Great, because now I can ask, how do you think that's going to happen? Is it going to happen whether I motivate you or drive you to do that? Or do you think you need to take some ownership over that aspiration? And if you were to take ownership over that aspiration, what would it look like?
I'm going to reflect back what I've written down there. Your 5-step approach, why play, has a motivational feel. Why are you playing has a motivational feel to it. What are you trying to accomplish feels like goal setting. How they think they can do that, self-awareness. What work are you doing? It almost feels, you said about energy, but it always feels like practice. How am I going about my practice? And then who do you want to be? The self-control element there. And who's in your circle? Kind of a social orientation piece there. That's kind of what I'm hearing from those 5.
You've summed it up way better than I could.
No, not at all. No, it's brilliant. I love it. I'm going to, as I sometimes say on the Sports Soap Show, I'm going to shamelessly steal it from you, mate.
Oh, I mean, and I suppose, though I've done some recent academic work and doing some research papers and stuff, I think that's like my journey into it was I started practically, and now I'm understanding deeper the theories behind the practice. And I've actually loved that as a learning journey. Like, you get into the dirt, you find out all these things, you write down all these things, you create all these ideas, and then then you find out they're justified by a whole bunch of science and study and research. And that's probably been the way that I've gone about it, which I think, like, when people talk to me, they go, you're very practical. And I'd say that's how I learned the work. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, because it pretty much mirrors me, in as much as professional golf and then being a PGA golf coach was my entrance point really to sports psychology. Hey, what I'm interested in, because you're talking a lot about relationships and you're talking about the importance of those, and has a very, again, going towards the literature here, has a real transformational feel here, transformational coaching, transformational leadership. At the other end of the continuum is transactional. Is there any space for transactional? Is it times when you've got to, when maybe you don't necessarily have the relationship there, or the relationship isn't going to happen, or it's not possible, or can being transactional be impactful at times?
100%, 100%. And I think this is where I think sometimes the literature frustrates me, because the nuance of practice requires adaptability.
Yeah.
And so, like, there's been numbers of times I've read things in my own research, or I'm writing something, and I'll be like, I understand where you're coming from. I'm not trying to be critical of the academic literature, but I'm like, this doesn't work all the time this way. So, for example, if I have a player who doesn't really have the emotional energy or time to want to build a relationship, but understands that what you offer has some value, then 100% I'm going to give them everything they need. Yeah, because it is transactional at that point. Now, do I think the work is less effective in a transitional relationship? Yes, I do, because when you, in a transactional relationship, because when you get into the idea of actually knowing someone, geez, I don't know about you, but that is the groundwork of my ability to deliver good work. But at the same time, if it's required, it's required. And that happens still pretty often.
I want to return to the framework that you prefer to use. You talked about strengths-based positive psychology. What does that mean to you? I'm sure it means different things to different sports psychs, and it certainly would mean either lots of different things or nothing at all to coaches out there.
So if I'm a coach, I'll do a real practical coaching term. Like, you select people for what they do, not for what they don't do. So why do we review their performances, train them through a work-on culture? I hate work-ons, by the way. I hate them. I hate that we build our player development models around the reactive process after each performance that has no strategy to it, that has players jumping left, right, and center, not knowing actually what they need to work on in a very, very deliberate way. So the strength model enables for me to go, you're in the room because of what you do. Yes, we're aware. So to me, the language I use is we focus on what you're good at, but we're aware of the limitations you have. And when those limitations become compromising to your ability to perform, then we do have a chat about it. But ultimately, and I think just from a self-esteem of the athlete, like, how do you have authentic belief when all you get told is what you don't do well? Like, so to me, understanding what you're good at, understanding from a coach why you want that person to be good. I remember there was a quote from Steve Hansen, and I think it was going into the 2015 World Cup, which I think was ultimately the best team they've ever had. And he asked them, like, are you going to do anything innovative? Are you going to look? And he says, no, we're just going to be the best at what we're already good at. And I just love that as a notion of player development. Like, why don't you just become the best at what you're already good at? And, once again, there's always a caveat on that, which is, listen, if you got things in your game that make you unselectable, let's address them. But at the same time, like, you think about gains, like, are you going to get more gains in your performance by increasing your capability and your good things? Or are you going to get more gains by working on a couple of things that you're not good at? I still argue to the point of increasing strengths is still the best way to enhance performance. So that's sort of why. And then also the work, then we can shift the philosophy of the work internally within the group. Like, what's Walsh here for? He's here to help you get better at what you're already good at. Like, then all of a sudden, that's a great platform for the work to be done, rather than he's in the back of the room. If you're playing poorly and then you need some more work on, go talk to him. So from a coaching aspect, yeah, I mean, I think in general, Wayne Smith's had a massive influence here in New Zealand, and Graham Henry, where for 20 years the idea has been around player-centric, strength-based coaching. So that's influenced me, obviously, in a massive way.
How does that work from a psych or mental skills perspective? If, let's say, you've got players who have clear deficits in the mental side of the game,
yep,
they become, as a random example, engulfed in emotion, just
yep.
The basic temperament challenge.
Yep.
I'm assuming that there still has to be a form of
100%.
An investigation into that, working on that.
Yeah. And I'd probably go at it from the lens of, like if you want, or in a deficit approach, which would be, why do you keep doing this? It's dumb. And what are we going to do about it too? My approach would be, when you're at your best, what are you thinking and doing? And then once we've established that, okay, well, what gets in the way, mate? If you don't have a framework of proficiency, then why would you always just focus on deficits? Because you've got to have a framework of proficiency for the deficits to make sense, from my thinking, to be honest. If our reference point is what you're not doing well, do we have a reference point of what you are doing well? And if we have a strong enough reference point of what you are doing well, then we can have a comparative conversation around when you're at your best, when you're at your worst. And then the work makes more sense to have that discussion, rather than to begin with, you get redhead and you do dumb stuff. Okay. So how far away is that from when you're at your best? When you're at your best, what are you? I'm calm, I'm composed, and I'm really clear in my thinking. And what I would use in that situation would be the idea around, and I think to regulate intensity, I just say you got two toggles: emotion and logic. So, if you've got an overly emotive player, we're going to pull on the toggle of logic a little bit more. If we've got a player who's a bit flat, we can pull on the toggle of emotion. But my point being in that, Dan, is what we need to start with a reference point of, at my best. We need to help people paint that. And if they can paint that, then they go, oh, I went back into that stuff, didn't I? But I now know what my better or best looks like, so I can climb out of that, rather than if all we're exploring is when they're at their worst, then how do we have transformational change?
You ever done any studying on solution-focused brief therapy? Because that's exactly what you're speaking to. So solution-focused brief therapy.
Good. I'll write that down and go, okay, good. That's another one I can use.
SFBT, yeah. A problem is never always a problem. Even for those, it stems from work by two incredible clinical psychologists who've both passed away now, Insoo Kimberg and Steve DeShazer, and they were clinical psychologists who in their clinic noticed that people who suffer from severe depression aren't always depressed. People who experience alcoholism, who are alcoholics, don't always crave a drink. And so what they're trying to do is they probed into times when they don't always want to drink, or they don't want to drink, or they probed in times where depressives aren't feeling depressed. And so they're looking at those periods of resources and strengths and times when the problem isn't there, and striving to magnify those times or utilize those resources. It's precisely what you're speaking to.
Yeah, I just think, we look at these people and we go, okay, well, you think about your own life, unless you have a picture or a vision or whatever that might be of where you're at your best and what you're trying to do. It's really hard then to bridge up. You know what I mean? That's your anchor. That's what I'm going towards. That's what I'm striving towards. And so when you do fall below that standard, you got a reference point. Okay, that's not where I need to be. But some of these young, I think some of our young players in particular, they don't even have a reference point for what. If I ask them, what does a mentally proficient rugby player in your position do well? Who's someone you admire? Because I often have to start there. Who's someone you admire? What do you reckon the mental qualities that they possess are?
A model.
Yeah, just some reference point to what they think they could be in the mental space.
Yeah.
But often they're completely unaware of what that could look like. But all they know is, I know what I do wrong, but I don't know. I drift. I hate it. I'll talk to someone, I just drifting in our games. What do you even mean by that? And what they've been often told is the coach told them that they drifted. and they might have drifted, but it's not really precise in their understanding. So I think sometimes, I don't know how you feel, mate, but sometimes part of our role is just unpacking what's happening to them in moments that they think they've got some idea, but they really are struggling to connect that to any way that they could resolve it.
You've made me think there, and I wanted to ask you this question. In your experience, in your extensive experience, better the player, the more knowledgeable the player? Or is that not always the case?
I reckon you go both ways. I reckon you can have players that are absolutely out to lunch.
It's a polite way of putting it.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant because they don't think. If you think in a game, what would cause more damage? I don't know the answer. I'm just making up a question here. Overthinking or not thinking enough?
I think it does depend. I mean, I think even the ones who seem like they're brilliant. They seem like they're not thinking. It's maybe that they just can't articulate themselves, but there's something about that. It's a procedural knowledge rather than a declarative knowledge. They can't tell you what they do it. But I just wonder sometimes in their own mind, they can articulate to themselves sort of kinesthetic and visually what they do. They're just not necessarily.
I think a lot of it's experiential proficiency.
That's a really good
term.
The
experience, they've just seen multiple pitches and they become instinctive in their ability to maneuver through those, rather than, and you would have heard, obviously, this Maverick Top Gun was such a cool movie last year. And, I've heard all these coaches, it's funny, don't think, just do. Oh. And, it became like Mavericks. And it's such a bad idea because I understand what they're saying, but you have to be able to think clearly to do well. You actually have to be able to have an idea of what you're trying to accomplish. And what they're saying is don't overthink and allow that to inhibit the ability that you've already trained. I get that, and I agree with that. But the idea of that, you shouldn't think and just do, because I think the zone and zoning out almost would look the same from the outside.
Yes. Oh, and I think that's particularly pertinent. I mean, we've unpacked that a few times, whether it was on the Sports Psych show recently, Bernadette Kellerman, Dr. Matt Schweikel from Wollongong University, and Dr. Christian Swan, where we talked about the proposed difference between flow and clutch, and that we all want that desired flow state, but players still have to have the proficiency to push through clutch, to be able to put effort in when they need to put effort in. And that's certainly not no thinking. It's not overthinking, but it's utilizing the kind of tools, philosophies that we talk about on a day-to-day basis in order to get through the tough stuff as it's thrown at them during a game.
Yeah, 100%. And I do think there is a thoroughness that's required to actually be adaptable anyway.
It would be ridiculous of me to interview a Kiwi without talking about the All Blacks, and I want to go there. But I'm going to start by asking you about the difference between working in club versus international, club rugby versus international rugby. As a practitioner, what's the difference? Is there a difference? If there is, what's the difference? Do you go about it differently? Because obviously sensibility suggests you've got athletes, rugby players, footballers, if it's football, in the same location, if you like, every day for their club team, whereas internationals, they come in, out, camps, etc. What does that mean for you? What's the repercussions for you?
I think it's a good question, mate. I think the lens that I've looked at through it is campaigns versus seasons.
Okay.
As a way of defining that, because the part about a campaign is you don't have the time that you have during a season to build the depth of relationship, and you actually have to probably move more transactional. That would probably be the biggest thing. Like I can't go in for a 6-week campaign in the autumn or Six Nations and observe. I just can't. That's not my point there. I've got to make some impact, so I've got to move quite quick. Does that make sense? So, fast forward building trust, fast forward creating connection. How do I do that in a much more, maybe in a collective way? So maybe it might be, hey, coach, on the first Monday I'm in, give me 10 minutes to tell a little story about who I am. not because I need the platform, but it enables everybody to understand where I'm coming from. And then, like, it might be 10 minutes on. So I did it with a recent team. Why am I here? What am I trying to accomplish, and how am I going to go about that? So that just bang, or, like straight away we're into it and everybody understands. So then I can get on with the work, really. Whereas over a season, like we've got, I think we had 50 in last week with the Chiefs because of preseason. And, I just feel you can just sort of go a bit deeper. And, with a season, you're going to have more seasons, hopefully, if the work goes well. So I'm now in year 5, which it makes it so much advantageous because some guys I don't have to give much attention to. They're good and we've done a lot of work. But I think getting impact quickly is demanded in a campaign. Yes, it's demanded in a season, but it's different because there's the ebbs and flows of like 16 games, and you sort of work around that and you work through that. Whereas, man, 4 weeks or 6 weeks with the Six Nations, it goes really fast. Like, it goes way faster than you think, and you have to move on quicker than you think. And so move on from, a defeat or a victory. You don't have time to muck around. And, whereas in a season, it feels like, it's a bit slower. Does that make sense? Like the pace is a bit slower, recovery, and like as far as mental recovery and warming their way up into the week. Whereas you get into a tournament, man, you got to be going day one of training. You got to be full noise, ready to go. So that would probably be the difference.
Well, if you don't mind me asking you, then what specific behaviours are you engaging in when you're full on? You got to go. It's more transactional. Are you almost coming back to the kind of conversation we had earlier? Are you actually explicitly striving to reach out to players and engage them and sit there with that? Not even a coffee. It's just trying to have more one-to-ones. Are you doing more group work? What is it? And I understand that
we're doing more group work.
Yep.
Like if I'm in a campaign, I'll do at least one. We just call them mind gyms a week, collectively with the team. Okay. So what I mean by that, Dan, is you set up a mindset anchor that's going to be critical for the game plan to be delivered. So this is where I go back to the head coach. It's like, all right, coach, what's your plan this week? Okay, how do you want to play? Okay, now what mindset do we need to sit alongside that to enable that plan to be delivered? So, if we want to play really expansive, we might go in on the subjects on courage and trust and, but if we want to have a real grindy full game, we might be in on ruthlessness, like just using different anchors to bring the team collectively back. And then I might go in a D meeting, I might go in the leaders meeting, which is, so I'm probably in way more because I'm trying to get across everything as quickly as possible. But all the same time, without panic, without stress, like, hey, I'll get to who I get to. Like, I'm not going to stress out about that, but I understand there's a bit of urgency around making sure that the work's done in a way that we need to. So I think, to answer your question, campaign's more collective work because we need to get everybody up to speed as quickly as possible. And the best way to do that is stay within a team session. Across a season, more foundations laid in preseason. Like, I've just finished preseason with the Chiefs, got our first game tonight. Like, I did a ton of mind gyms in the preseason. So when I come back during the season, I'll do little 5-minute slots once or twice a week. We just call them top-ups. But they're already the foundations have been built. Whereas, like, in a campaign, no time to build those foundations. So it's almost like taking the best of what you got and using it that way rather than like, I can't do 7 mind gyms during a Six Nations of 40 minutes each to lay the mental foundations for the group. That's not happening. So where can you have impact is probably the question.
I was going to ask you just last one on this one. Mind gym, how long ordinarily would a group session, a mind gym last? It depends.
I've got a rule that I'm trying to work off right now, which everyone else, all the other sports, are going, oh no, Walsh, you don't do this. 12 minutes max.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to here's why. So whenever I talk to a group, there's 3 things that I'm always aiming to do. It's got to be simple, so they've got to understand it. Mm-hmm. It's got to be relevant, so it's got to meet the needs that they have within the context they're in. And it's got to be applicable. They've got to be able to take something away and do something with it. So if you think simple, relevant, and applicable, there's no way you can introduce more than one or two concepts and stay true to that. As far as like, I couldn't go and do, 20 minutes on the background of A, B, and C, So, for example, we might do a thing around the week around what are going to be two anchors that you're going to need to start. So I might do something around clarity and intensity being the foundation of good performance on the field. So what's your role? What do you need how do you learn that role the best this week? And then the intensity, it might be something like, what RPMs do you run best at when you're playing? And when do you turn the engine on? And then also when do you turn it off so you can recover? So that would be like, that sounds so simple, but that's a 5 to 7 minute session that they walk out of hopefully going, oh yeah, I got to be clear and I got to have good energy. So I got to have clarity and energy. This is how I get that. All right, I'm good to go for the week. Does that make sense? That's sort of how that would be a typical little mind gym.
They sound like presentations, ever facilitations.
Yep. So depending on the thing, like I used to be massive into splitting people into groups and having them chat, their feedback.
Okay.
The actual feedback I've got recently, like this is interesting, from two of the groups I'm working with currently, was we love that the fact you lay it out, you make it nice and clear, you upload it to our group chat, and then we have time to go away and develop and think about that instead of having to sit in a group of 5 and it's the first time we've heard a concept and we've got no space to process that, and then we have to come up with a few answers.
Interesting. Yeah.
Honestly, I'm sort of shifting away. Like, it's probably like anti what everybody else is probably, but I've found like some of those forced facilitation in the name of maybe engagement. I don't know if that's the right term, mate. I understand what we're trying to do, but then, like, for example, when we came up with some work I just did around like your tendencies under pressure, like knowing yourself under pressure, when we got into the units, their positional units, we had them talk to each other about what their tendencies are, how to recognize, and how you can help each other under pressure. So that was done in another setting rather than in the team setting.
I think there's another interesting dynamic there that I've experienced from feedback from players is the social anxiety dynamic to that, in as much as
100%.
we forget these are human beings.
Like, don't call on me, talk to someone else.
Yeah. And in our world, there might be adults, there might be elite performers, they might even be famous. And they sometimes you're talking about players who are, let's go back to, that player is very good at what they do, but isn't necessarily an instructional leader, somebody who can articulate themselves or find it easy to articulate themselves what they do and how others should do it. And it's interesting, we live in this world more and more. We talk about the importance of being autonomy supportive and being facilitative and huddles and getting players involved, but some players just do not like that. They are,
and I think some players don't know. Like I know the phase of the question-based coaching was really massive. Never give an answer, only answer the question. But I've found some players just tell me. Like, if you tell me what I need to do, that's how I'm going to learn how to do it. Like, I don't actually have an answer for it. What so many awkward coaching conversations I don't know if you had where, what do you think you should be doing here? And then it's another question, and the guy's basically just putting, I don't know. Like, this is new to me. Like, you're my coach. Can you help me navigate through by telling me what I'm experiencing and feeling and where I need to be and how I need to do that? I've never done this before. And I still think there's heaps of room for that sort of coaching, as long as it's not the only coaching. But I still think there's room for that sort of coaching, particularly with inexperienced players who are, socially anxious or insecure and are way more scared of getting the answer wrong. We can help them navigate through that a bit simpler.
You can really impact their experience of being on that team. I'm mindful of your time, and as I mentioned 10 minutes ago, I do want to have the All Blacks conversation.
Yeah.
Aaron, why are the All Blacks the most successful rugby team of all time, if not the most successful sports team from your perspective?
Pretty talented down here.
What do you mean? What does that mean, talented? What do you mean?
We have talented rugby players. Like I know you'll have some quotes around, what is it, like culture eats strategy for breakfast, which is to me just such a dumb statement. Is that for me the evidence of a great culture is good strategy, so that doesn't even make sense to me. Like, how do you have a good culture there? And what they're saying is that, and it's culture's the king, and the environment's here, and I get that. But there's some teams that are playing in the lower divisions of leagues all over the world that maybe have the best culture in the world.
Mm.
They're not going to win because they don't have enough talent. So you've got to understand where talent fits within the scenario. If you have talented players, it's a huge advantage. We've had arguably the most talented players in the last 30 or 40 years or 50 years have come out of New Zealand as far as their ability to be really good rugby players. Now, then you marry into that legacy. Like there is an expectation of when you put on that jersey that you inherit the expectations of what you said before. Mm-hmm. And I reckon that can create a burden, but I think mostly it creates a good edge. Because you want to continue the legacy that's those before you have done, whether it's been winning World Cups or Tri-Nations or whatever it is. And so I think there's been a combination of really, really talented players coming into a historically deep history of success and an expectation that gets continued. And then also around that, what I said earlier, I think the genius of some of our coaches over the years, particularly around player empowerment and strength-based coaching, has been key. But, now we're at a point in the rugby continuum where the North is more powerful, which is awesome.
Okay. So I feel what I'm hearing you say is we can romanticize sweeping the sheds and having no D heads.
Yeah.
But ultimately, that's great and that's nice and that plays a part. But if you don't have players with physical, technical ability, then it becomes less impactful.
100%. Yeah, like talent, skill.
Where does that come from for you guys? Because look, I don't want to have that conversation about talent. We've had that plenty of time on the Sports Social, not least the brilliant Joe Baker who came on a few weeks ago. But is that nurtured through the environment you guys grow up in? I've heard it all: backyard games, touch rugby early in life. Is it both of those things?
Yeah, it's that. Like I'm older now. I'm 47. I played touch or league or some form of that every single lunchtime.
Yeah.
For the 13, 14 years I was at school. Like, then after school, you got to play touch.
Yeah.
You just do it. Like, Saturday play rugby, sneak off on Sunday to play rugby league. Like, you walk around school, you got a ball, someone's flick passing, someone's trying to do something. It literally is part of our culture to have a rugby ball. Now, the only place where it's way more intense and arguably where the greatest talent in the world lies is, have you ever been to Fiji?
I've not been, but yes, I know what you're saying.
You drive through Suva and those fields are packed with like every day after school, it's packed. They love rugby more than anyone I've ever seen. But look at the talent. You got New Zealand props who will go over to the North and kick goals. And you're like, how did that? Well, after school, they went to the field and they kicked goals with their mates. And then they did drop goals and then they tried to do, that's just I suppose the culture which we grew up was very rugby centric.
And an unstructured one rather than overly structured?
Completely unstructured. Yeah. Like play. And I reckon the cool thing, which I think is not talked about enough, you tried stuff all the time. So, I think that's been one of the hallmarks of All Black Rugby is the audacity to actually try things under pressure that they've obviously trained, but would be looked at as going, that's wild. Whereas, you try and do a flick like a Sunny Bill, or you try and do something behind the back, or you try to develop a reverse pass or a flat kick or something, or, you try and step off both feet. Like, just that whole like, let's just give it a go and see what happens.
And correct me if I'm wrong, for that to translate to the first team, I mean, your historical knowledge of the All Blacks over the last 30 years would be far better than mine, but there was arguably, I don't know, I'm thinking end of 90s, early millennia, a little bit of a lull. England were number one and other teams there or thereabouts. And my understanding is that's where blue head, red head came in. So that kind of mental model that we haven't really spoken much about on the Sports Site show, but to be able to profit from the talent, they actually, the All Blacks still needed a good mental model and good mental support.
Probably two big turning points is probably the bigger one was 07.
Okay.
Like, I think 03 through there was mutterings that we needed to do something in this space.
Yeah.
Because we had lost 91, 95, 99, 2003. Probably went into all of those, maybe apart from 03 as favourites, and maybe 99 not so much favourites, but definitely 95 favourites, and, you know, amazing teams. And then, you know, McCaw in 07 post World Cup, distraught, seeking out Kerry Evans, basically to say, I can't do this if you don't help me. And then the introduction of, you know, and the red head, blue head is obviously something that's been really, really like well known here, particularly in New Zealand rugby circles.
Yep.
Unfortunately, not always well understood.
Okay.
Because I don't think it's red or blue. I think, as I said before, like, you have two toggles as an athlete, and one's emotion and one's logic. And the language I use is find your purple. I think it's better language.
Okay.
So your purple is when you think about red and blue, sometimes there's the idea of that emotion is not your friend.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think emotion is necessary in performance at times. And some people need to tap into that more than others. And especially, like, if you're going to put your body in front of 130 kg people on behalf of your mate time after time, there's got to be some emotional connection to what you're doing to make that level of sacrifice. Mm-hmm. And then also I've seen people go real calm, but they're passive. So I think it's a combination, finding out what works best for each person.
Really interesting. Aaron, what a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks, mate. I've enjoyed it. Great to be able to finally be on your show and chat around this sort of stuff.
Well, quite often at this point, I'm asking the guest to direct people towards the paper that they've just released. I know you have got one coming up, but, you know, we didn't talk about that today. But or the book they're trying to sell. You don't have that quite yet, but you know, you're really interactive, I know, and brilliantly so on both Twitter and LinkedIn, and I enjoy reading your posts. So how can people find you and follow you?
Yeah, I just think Twitter and LinkedIn, and like, my idea is like people ask me whether I have a posting strategy, and I don't.
Okay.
If I find something interesting, I'll post it.
Fair enough.
So there might be like 10 in a day and then none for 3 weeks. Probably frustrates people, but if it's interesting to me, then I think I'll share it.
Do you know what your Twitter handle is?
No.
just type in Aaron Walsh, AARON Walsh, and they'll find you. Okay. All right. Perfect. No. Well, Aaron, I can't thank you enough for your time today. Thanks.
You're welcome, mate.
Well, everybody, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, think. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the Sports Psych Show. I'd be delighted to hear any suggestions that you have. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.